السابقون الأولون من المهاجرين والأنصار والذين اتبعوهم بإحسان.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So carrying on with the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, we've now reached hadith number 6. عن النعمان ابن بشير رضي الله عنه ورضي الله عنهما قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إن الحلال بين وإن الحرام بين وبينهما مشتبهات لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس فمن اتقى الشبهات استبرأ لدينه وعرضه ومن وقع في الشبهات وقع في الحرام كالراعي يرعى حول الحمى يوشك أن يرتع فيه ألا وإن لكل ملك حمى ألا وإن حمى الله محارمه ألا وإن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله وإذا فسدت فسد الجسد كله ألا وهي القلب رواه البخاري ومسلم. In this hadith reported by An-Nu'man ibn Bashir ibn Amr al-Ansari, and he and his father Bashir ibn Amr were both companions. So An-Nu'man ibn Bashir radiyallahu anhu was a companion, and then also Bashir ibn Amr radiyallahu anhu was a companion. He says that I heard the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam say, إن الحلال بين وإن الحرام بين, that indeed the halal is clear and the haram is clear. The halal is clear and the haram is clear. فالحلال بين فيما نص الله تعالى عليه في القرآن أنه حلال. So that which is halal is clear from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has informed us of in the Quran. أو نص عليه صلى الله عليه وسلم, or from that which the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم informed us of. كما في قوله تعالى أحلت لكم بهيمة الأنعام, as an example where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned to us the permissibility of the animals that you can slaughter and eat, the cows, the sheep, etc. They are mentioned in the Quran. The camels, the cows, the sheep, the bahimatul an'am. ومثل قوله تعالى وأحل الله البيع. And another example in the Quran where it's been made clear about something being halal is in the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that Allah has made transactions halal, business and trade and transactions halal. فالبيع حلال ما لم يشتمل على غرر أو غش أو خداع وهو من أطيب المكاسب. So buying and selling, that is permissible and a means of halal income as long as there is no deception involved in your trade, as long as there is no cheating, deception, or any of that nature of business involved in your trade. It's a legitimate trade, Islamically legitimate and good, then that is one of the best ways of receiving your halal income. So that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has declared as halal, and the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam has mentioned as halal, then we take those affairs as halal and we stick to the boundaries of what is halal. قال وإن الحرام بين. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, indeed the haram is clear. So what is halal is clear, mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah. And what is haram is clear, mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah. وَإِنَّ الْحَرَامَ بَيِّنٌ وَهُوَ مَا نَصَّ اللَّهُ أَوْ رَسُولُهُ عَلَى تَحْرِيمِهِ. So the aspects or the things that are haram, that is what Allah and His Messenger have specified as being haram. مثل قوله تعالى, and an example of that, where Allah said in the Quran, حرمت عليكم الميتة والدم ولحم الخنزير وما أهل لغير الله به. That the deceased animals, those that you did not sacrifice, you did not slaughter, they are just dead corpses, they are haram upon you, you cannot eat them. We know that Islamically, to eat the animals, the cows, the sheep, the camels, etc., you have to slaughter them, sacrifice them in the name of Allah. The proper sacrificing must be done of those animals. If you find one of those animals just dead, you're walking in a forest or a field and you come across a dead sheep or a dead cow, dead by itself for some other reason, you cannot take that and eat it. You did not sacrifice it and slaughter it. It died for some other cause and reason. It's a corpse. Those are impermissible to eat. حرمت عليكم الميتة والدم, and the blood that comes from them, ولحم الخنزير, and pork, and all of the meat of the pig, and what has been slaughtered for other than Allah. And all of these things are mentioned as haram by the text of the Quran. And also another example, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as another example of al-haramu bayyin, that the haram is clear. Allah has clarified to us the things that are haram. Another example of it is when Allah told us, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ. Do not kill the soul, the person whom it is forbidden for you to do so, except the one with due right. When is it with due right? For example, the easy example would be the capital punishment. Islamically that exists, that the murderer can be given the punishment of himself being killed, the capital punishment as they call it. So that would be a permissible taking of the life of that person. That would be permissible to take the life of that person. Qisas. The person murdered someone, it is permissible now to implement what is known as the capital punishment, that his life is then taken. That is bil haqq. That is with right. But without right, without due right, that you go and murder someone, you kill someone, Allah has told us, without due right, it is haram, impermissible to take the life of another without due right in any way. فالله حرم قتل الأنفس المعصومة بغير حق. So Allah has forbidden killing people with no right. وقال تعالى, and another example of al-haram bayyinun, that the haram affairs are clear. Another example of that, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا. Allah tells us, do not go anywhere near fornication. Do not go anywhere near fornication. Notice the scholars say in the ayah, Allah did not say do not fornicate. Allah said do not go anywhere near fornication. Meaning the act of fornication is of course haram, but then Allah is telling us do not even tread upon the pathways or open the doors that could lead you in the end to fornication. Do not even open those initial doors that can lead you to this act of fornication. Stay away from them too. And so that is again another clear haram mentioned to us. أي اتركوه واتركوا الوسائل التي تقرب إليه. So abandon and stay away from this act of fornication, and also all of the means that would potentially lead you on to fornication. مثل النظرة, for example, looking at affairs that are impermissible from those desires that may then eventually lead to fornication. والخلوة المحرمة, and also being in isolation with women that are not your maharim, various types of acts that may lead to fornication, then they are impermissible also. And another example of al-haramu bayyinun, that the haram is clear. Another example, وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا, in the same ayah, وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made business and trade permissible, but He made interest haram. The interest, the riba, that is haram and that is impermissible. فَمَا نَصَّ اللَّهُ أَوْ رَسُولُهُ عَلَى أَنَّهُ حَلَالٌ يُؤْخَذْ وَمَا نَصَّ عَلَى أَنَّهُ حَرَامٌ يُتْرَكْ وَلَيْسَ هُنَاكَ مَجَالٌ لِلتَّرَدُّدِ إِلَّا مِمَّنْ فِي قَلْبِهِ زَيْغٌ أَوْ هَوَى. So what Allah and His Messenger have clarified to us as being halal, then that is halal and taken as halal. And what Allah and His Messenger have clarified to us is haram, then that is haram and it is abandoned. There is no room for any type of doubt within the heart of a person, or to be wavering upon this issue, to think maybe I can, maybe I can't, maybe this is okay. What is halal is halal, what is haram is haram. And a person does not cross over the boundaries. قال, but then the Messenger said, after clarifying the halal is clear, the haram is clear, mentioned in the texts of the Quran and the Sunnah. But then the Messenger tells us, وَبَيْنَهُمَا مُشْتَبِهَاتٍ. between them, between the clear halal and the clear haram, between them is or are the ambiguous affairs. There may be in between the two certain affairs that are ambiguous. Are they halal? Are they haram? يعني أمور مشتبهات بين الحلال والحرام لا يدرى هل هي من الحلال أو هي من الحرام. So there may be affairs in between the two and you do not know. Is this particular affair from the halal or is this particular affair from the haram? لأنها تنازع فيها الأدلة. Because those are affairs that perhaps there are some evidences this way and that way. And so it becomes slightly ambiguous. Evidences saying this, evidences saying that. And so then it becomes slightly ambiguous. Is it halal then or is it haram? وَهَذَا مِمَّا اخْتَلَفَ فِيهِ الْعُلَمَاء. So those may be certain types of affairs that the scholars have differed over. There may be certain types of affairs that the scholars have differed over. فَبَعْضُهُمْ أَفْتَى بِجَوَازِهِ. So some of them, they give the fatwa that these affairs or whatever the affair is permissible. وَبَعْضُهُمْ أَفْتَى بِتَحْرِيمِهِ. But some of them, they give the fatwa on that same affair that it is haram maybe. نظرا لأن كل واحد منهم رجح جانبا من الدليل. Because the scholars on either side of that issue, they have looked at the evidences and maybe some of them gave more weight to the understanding that it's halal from the evidences, and some of them gave more weight to the evidences indicating it's haram, and so they came to different conclusions. فهذا مشتبه لا يدرى هل هو من الحلال أو الحرام. So that type of affair is from those ambiguous matters. And it's not known, is it from the halal then or is it from the haram? فإنه يترك من باب الاحتياط والتورع حتى يتبين أمره. Al-Shaykh Al-Fawzan says those types of issues, then what should be done is that you leave them for the meanwhile. For the meantime, leave them. The issues where they appear to be ambiguous and there are statements of scholars here, statements of scholars there, those types of affairs, then leave them aside as a precaution until the matter becomes clearer in them. Leave them aside as a precaution. فَإِن تَبَيَّنَ أَنَّهُ حَرَامٌ يُتْرَكُ نِهَائِيًا. And if it becomes clear later on that this issue is, this particular ruling is that it's haram, then that affair is left. وَإِن تَبَيَّنَ أَنَّهُ حَلَالٌ أُخِذْ. But if it becomes clear that this is halal, then you take it. أما ما لم يتبين وهو مشتبه فإن الورع والاحتياط ترك هذا الشيء. But if a particular topic or a particular action, you cannot determine definitely, precisely, is it from the halal or the haram, and there are statements here and statements there, then it's better to try to avoid that until some clarity comes in terms of halal or haram. And it's important to note that this discussion here the Shaykh is talking about is within the realms of the scholars. Within the realms of the scholars. Not within the realms of the scholars and the common folk. Meaning that the scholars come along and say something is halal. The common folk who are not from the scholars say it's haram. Now you're going to say it's ambiguous? No. It's not ambiguous like that. The scholars have all told you the Islamic ruling on something is halal, and then the commoners come along and say it's haram. You cannot say the affair has fallen into the mushtabih. The people of knowledge have told you it's halal. There is no ibrah to the commoners telling you it's haram. And the other way too. The scholars tell you something is haram, and the common folk, they say no, it's halal. That has not become from the mushtabih. That has not become from the ambiguous. The scholars are telling you it's haram. The Islamic ruling on a particular thing is haram. The commoners come and tell you it's halal. Their statement is not where the weight is given. This discussion the Shaykh is talking about is where you have scholars on a particular ruling. Some say maybe halal, this evidence, that evidence. Others may be haram, this evidence, that evidence. Discussions between the scholars on an affair. Then maybe now you're unsure, it's ambiguous. But that's important to remember. It is not the discussion of the scholars to the common folk. The common folk are not the ones who will determine and give you fatwas on the rulings of your religion. Rather, it is the scholars who will do that. So the mushtabihat the Shaykh is talking about here is ikhtalafa fihi al-ulama, where the scholars have differed over an affair. قال لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس, that many people, they do not know of these affairs. Many people do not know of the details of these particular affairs. لأن أكثر الناس جهال لا يعرفون طريق الاستدلال والترجيح, because many of the people are ignorant and they do not know the methodology in how to deduce rulings from the evidences. And that is talking about a certain level. When the Shaykh says here, many people are juhal, but then he says, because they do not know how to derive the evidences, the rulings from the evidences. Those level of juhal could even be from people who are studying. Students of knowledge in the early levels of study will not be at the level where they know how to extrapolate and deduce the rulings from the evidences. It requires study, and it requires knowing and learning usul al-fiqh into deep levels and good levels to be able to then look at an evidence and derive rulings from it. It's one thing knowing an evidence. It's one thing knowing the evidences. It's another deriving and extrapolating the proofs and the evidences and the rulings from those texts. And that is where the scholars, they come in. The scholars, the people of knowledge, the ones who understand usul al-fiqh, and they understand the usul of the religion, and they understand all the evidences, they are then able to extrapolate and deduce the rulings from those evidences. So the people who are not able to do that, then for them certain affairs may fall into the ambiguous from their perspective, because they don't know how to precisely deal with this particular issue and to derive the ruling from it. So it falls into the ambiguous zone for them. فقوله لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس دل على أن القليل من الناس يعلمهن. So the fact that the messenger said many of the people do not know indicates that there are only a small proportion from amongst the people who do know. If the messenger is telling us لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس, many of the people don't know these affairs, indicating therefore that there are only a small proportion who do know, these affairs. And who are they? وَهُمْ الرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ يَعْلَمُونَ هَذِهِ الْمُشْتَبِهَاتِ. They are the ones who are firmly grounded in knowledge. They are the ones who are firmly grounded in knowledge. يَعْلَمُونَ هَذِهِ الْمُشْتَبِهَاتِ. They are the ones who know and understand these ambiguous affairs and what to do with them. And whether they fall into haram or whether they fall into halal. Those firmly grounded scholars, ulama, people of knowledge, they are able to determine what is going on with the affairs of ambiguity. وَذَلِكَ, and that is because بِمَا أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ وَالْفَهْمِ, because of what Allah has blessed those people with, those firmly grounded people of knowledge. Allah has blessed them with al-ilm wal-fahm, knowledge and understanding. وَمَعْرِفَةِ قَوَاعِدِ الْإِسْتِدْلَالِ وَالتَّرْجِيحِ, and knowing the principles of how to extrapolate rulings and deduce the rulings and work out the rulings of a particular issue. They've been given that level of knowledge and understanding and depth to be able to do that. فَمَنْ تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ أَنَّهَا حَلَالٌ أَخَذَهَا وَمَنْ تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ أَنَّهَا حَرَامٌ تَرَكَهَا. So then when it becomes clear to them what is halal, then you take that, and when it becomes clear that something is haram, then you leave that. وَمَنْ اشْتَبَهَ عَلَيْهِ الْأَمْرُ فَإِنَّهُ يَتَوَقَّفُ عَنْهَا. And if something remains in that ambiguous zone, it is ambiguous and a person cannot work it out, is it in the halal or is it in the haram, then that type of affair يَتَوَقَّفُ عَنْهَا. A person holds back from that affair, stops from entering into that affair. And this is something common you hear from the scholars, that if a scholar is asked a question about a particular issue and he doesn't know the details of that topic because of this, there are evidences maybe indicating it's halal, evidences maybe indicating it's haram, and it's still within the ambiguous area for them, then you hear the scholar saying, أَنَا مُتَوَقِّفٌ. It comes to certain topics, they say, أَنَا أَتَوَقَّف, أَنَا مُتَوَقِّف, that I'm holding back on this issue. I'm holding back on this issue. I'm not entering into it and giving a fatwa, it's this or it's that. I'm holding back from it. أَنَا مُتَوَقِّف. And that is where the scholars, they are in this kind of situation where maybe evidences are indicating this, maybe evidences are indicating that, and it's difficult to get a rajih, a decisive conclusion. So they'll say, أَنَا مُتَوَقِّف, that I'm holding back in giving a fatwa or entering into that topic for the reasons mentioned here. And then the Shaykh says, وَهَذَا هُوَ الْمَوْقِفِ مِنَ الْمُشْتَبِهَاتِ. This is the position you take from the ambiguous affairs. وَلِهَذَا قَالَ صلى الله عليه وسلم فَمَنِ اتَّقَى الشُّبُهَاتِ أي جعل بينه وبينها وقاية وهي الترك فقد استبرأ لدينه وعرضه. So the one who holds back from the ambiguous, where maybe this, maybe that, he holds back then and doesn't enter into it until maybe further clarity can be found, then that type of person, by taking that precaution, has استبرأ لدينه وعرضه. He has preserved the honor of his religion and his self. That he has preserved his honor, he's preserved his dignity, he's preserved himself and his religion by staying out of the ambiguous affair that may be halal, but then again may be haram. So whomsoever does that, he has protected and guarded his religion and protected and guarded over his own honor. وَهَاتَانْ مَزِيَّتَانْ عَظِيمَتَانْ توجبان على الإنسان ألا يتعجل في الأمور حتى يتبين له أمرها وإذا رأى الناس يختلفون فيها فهذا يفتي بأنها حلال وهذا يفتي بأنها حرام توقف وابتعد عنها. So this is something good for a person, that you stay back and you hold back on affairs where you see this ambiguity. And once again the Shaykh highlights that the ambiguity is where the scholars and the ulama have differed over an affair. And he mentions where you see one scholar giving the fatwa for something and another giving the fatwa for something, then you may hold back from that until it becomes clearer. And whomsoever does that, he has preserved himself and his religion. And then it says, وَمَنْ وَقَعَ فِي الشُّبُهَاتِ وَقَعَ فِي الْحَرَامِ, that whomsoever falls into those ambiguous affairs, then he has fallen into haram. وَقُلْتْ مَا دَامْ فِيهَا خِلَافٌ فَلَا بَأْسَ فِيهَا. And this is a very common thing, where a lot of people, they come across a particular issue from the rulings of the religion, some particular ruling on some particular aspect of the religion, and they find that some scholars say it's haram. It's haram to do this or that. But then there are some scholars who say it's okay. So you find many people, they just say simply, well, some scholar said it's okay, so they go and do it. No real research or reading into it. They say, well, some scholar said it was okay, so I'm just going to do it. I'm going to do this or do that, or this action of worship or that, or whatever it may be. So the Shaykh says it isn't like that. فهذا يجرك إلى أن تقع في الحرام لأنك إذا تساهلت في المشتبهات تساهلت في الحرام الصريح. Because if you take a very slack kind of position on these ambiguous affairs and you start doing everything, and you say, but somebody said and somebody said, and you start doing anything and everything with the ambiguous affairs, and you don't give importance and care to those affairs, then possibly in the long run, even when it comes to outright haram affairs, you may become very slack with them and even start falling into them. So it is dangerous. A person should not be in this way of excessive ease in blindly following something, or in simply saying, but somebody said it's okay. These affairs where there is significant issues in them and scholars have had discussions about them, then you need to look into those matters before simply taking a position. وهذا من الآفات الموجودة في الناس الآن. And this is one of the calamities, the Shaykh says, with people these days. ما دام في ذلك خلاف فليس علي حرج أن آخذ بأي قول شئت من الأقوال. The Shaykh says, people say as long as there is a difference of opinion, then it doesn't matter whichever opinion I take. نقول لا بل عليك أن تتحرى الحلال. The Shaykh says, no, rather when there is a difference of opinion between the scholars on something, you don't just say, خلاص, there's a difference, let me just pick whatever I want. Rather you look into it, read a little bit from what the differences are, and try to work out what you believe to be the truth. Try to look at the evidences the scholars are using to the best of your ability, to look to see where the truth is and then follow that. Not just to say, well, there are differences, let me just pick whichever one I want. Rather look at that and see where you consider the truth may be. فالإنسان إذا أراد أن يمر من طريق لا يدري هل هو آمن وخال من قطاع الطرق ومن الصداع أم لا، فإنه يتجنبه لاشتباه أمره عليه واحتمال أن يكون غيره آمن، وهذا في أمر من أمور الدنيا فكيف في أمر الدين الذي هو أعظم. The Shaykh says, when a person is going down a particular pathway and you don't know this particular pathway, this particular road, whether it is safe or not, and whether there are predatory animals down that pathway or not. If you don't know, then the safe thing that you're going to do is to avoid that pathway and find somewhere else. because you're not sure. Maybe there's predatory animals down in that region, maybe there's bandits and robbers down that way. You've heard, but you're not sure. So the best thing you can do is take precaution, avoid that pathway and go elsewhere until you find out what the reality is of that pathway. So the Shaykh says, if that's what you would do with your worldly matter, then certainly with religion, when it comes to your religious affairs, then you need to look into it carefully and look at what the scholars have mentioned and the evidences before doing anything. Like we said before, the asl in religious affairs is that everything is forbidden, haram, until you have the evidence proving it is halal. So this hadith, the Shaykh says, فيه إثبات الورع والاحتياط. The hadith highlights that you need to be careful and precautious about things. Then the Prophet ﷺ gave an example. ثم ضرب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم مثلا محسوسا للذي يقع في الشبهات. An example the Messenger gave regarding the one who falls into the ambiguous affairs and therefore falls into the haram. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, كالراعي, like a shepherd looking after sheep. يرعى حول الحمى, he is grazing his sheep on the boundaries of his land. On the boundaries of the land, meaning his field or his land that is designated to him. He's grazing his sheep out on the boundaries near there. And as a consequence of being near the boundaries, then it's very possible that due to that, some of his sheep may end up crossing over into the field that is not his and eating from the grass that is not his right for his animals to eat from. Because he took them right to the edge of his property, right to the boundaries of his fields. And so maybe some of them wander across into the fields of others and take and eat from the fields of others. And so he has fallen into haram, taken the rights of his neighbor or the rights of those who own those other fields. So the one who goes right up to the boundaries, then there is a risk of him falling into the haram. And that's what it mentions in the narration, that the one who, the shepherd who takes his sheep right up to the boundaries, يُوشِكُ أَنْ يَرْتَعَ فِيهِ, then it's possible that his sheep may fall across into that next field and eat from them, and he grazes them in there. And then it mentions أَلَا وَإِنَّ لِكُلِّ مَلِكٍ حِمَى, that every king or every ruler has his boundaries. أَلَا وَإِنَّ حِمَى اللَّهِ مَحَارِمُ, and the boundaries of Allah, what Allah has set, are the boundaries of the haram. That you can stay within the realms of the halal, but do not cross the boundaries into the haram. They are the boundaries that Allah has set, the haram. Do not go beyond the boundary into haram. And then it mentions ألا وإن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله وإذا فسدت فسد الجسد كله ألا وهي القلب. That indeed in the body there is a morsel, there is a part that if it is rectified, then all of the body is upon rectification. And if that morsel, that part of the body is corrupt, then the whole of the body becomes corrupt. And then the Messenger mentioned, أَلَا وَهِيَ الْقَلْبِ, that indeed that is the heart. فَإِذَا كَانَ فِي الْقَلْبِ صَلَاحٌ فَإِنَّ صَاحِبَهُ يَتَوَرَّعْ عَنِ الشُّبُهَاتِ. So if the heart is pure and upright upon rectification, then that kind of heart will stay away from the doubtful and the ambiguous matters. وَإِلَّا إِذَا كَانَ قَلْبُهُ لَيْسَ فِيهِ صَلَاحٌ فَإِنَّهُ لَنْ يُبَالِ بِشُبُهَاتٍ. But if a person doesn't have that uprightness in his heart, then he won't care about the ambiguous matters. ثُمَّ لَنْ يُبَالِ بِالْحَرَامِ فِيمَا بَعْدِ. And then later on down the path, he won't even care about the outright haram affairs even. فَالْمَدَارُ عَلَى الْقَلْبِ. So everything revolves around the heart. فَمَا هُوَ الْقَلْبِ. So then what is this heart? It is al-mudghah, يعني قطعة اللحم. It is this morsel of flesh. التي في الصدر, which is in the chest. والتي بها يميز الإنسان بين الضار والنافع. And with that morsel of flesh, that heart, a person distinguishes between the harmful and the good, وبين الطيب والخبيث, and between that which is good and that which is bad. قال تعالى فإنها لا تعمى الأبصار ولكن تعمى القلوب التي في الصدور. That it is not the eyesights that become blind, but it is the hearts in the chests that become blind. That he no longer distinguishes between the truth and falsehood, between good and bad. فإذا عمي القلب وقع الإنسان في الشرك والكفر والمفاسد. So if the heart becomes blind, then the person falls into shirk and kufr and other types of corruption. وإذا كان في القلب بصيرة فإنه يتجنب هذه الأشياء فالمدار على القلب. But if the heart is pure and upright, then that person stays away, refrains from, abstains from these types of ambiguous affairs and the haram. So everything revolves around the heart. قال ألا وإن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله. So if that heart is upon uprightness, meaning بخوف الله, having fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وتقواه, and being upon piety and righteousness and fear and taqwa of Allah, ومحبته, and being upon the love of Allah, then in that case all of his body will be upon goodness and upright. وإذا فسدت, but if it becomes corrupt, فَلَمْ تَخْشَ اللَّهِ. So then that heart does not fear Allah. وَلَمْ تَخَفْ مِنْهُ, and does not have any fear from Him. وَلَمْ تُحِبَّهُ, and does not love Him. فَإِنَّ الْجَسَدَ يَفْسِدُ. Then even all of the rest of the body becomes corrupt. All of it becomes corrupt and destroyed. لأن القلب هو ملك الجسد. Because the heart, it is the king, the controller of the body. وإذا صلح الملك صلحت الرعية. And just like if a king is upright, then his people and his citizens will be upright below him. وإذا فسد الملك فسدت الرعية. And if the leader, the king, was corrupt, then you expect the population under him to be upon corruption too. فعلى المسلم أن يسأل الله صلاح قلبه. So it is upon a Muslim to ask Allah always for the rectification of his heart. لأنه إذا صلح قلبه صلحت أموره كلها. Because if his heart is rectified, then all of his affairs will be good and rectified. وإذا فسد قلبه فسدت أموره كلها. But if his heart is corrupt, then all of his affairs will be corrupt. ولهذا كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يكثر من قوله. And that's why the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم used to often say, يا مقلب القلوب والأبصار ثبت قلبي على دينك. O Allah, the one who changes the hearts and the sights of the people, keep my heart firm upon your religion. فتقول له عائشة رضي الله عنها في ذلك. So then Aisha رضي الله عنها, she used to question the messenger or ask the messenger about that. فَيَقُولُ لَهَا, so he would say to her, يَا عَائِشَةَ وَمَا يُؤَمِّنُنِي وَقُلُوبُ الْعِبَادِ بين إصبعين من أصابع الرحمن إذا أراد أن يقلب قلب عبد قلبه. So when he would say, "Oh Allah, the one who changes the hearts of the people, keep my heart firm upon your religion." Aisha radiallahu anha used to be puzzled, asking the messenger, why do you need to make such a dua, or why the need to make that type of supplication? And she would ask him and question him about that. So the messenger would say to her, "Oh Aisha, what is it that gives me security, knowing that the hearts of the servants are between two fingers from the fingers of Ar-Rahman, and that he changes the heart of a servant if he wants? That why would I feel secure?" And we know that all of our hearts are between the two fingers from the fingers of Ar-Rahman, of our Lord, and if he wishes, he changes the heart of a person. And in one of the previous narrations we saw that the person يَعْمَلُ بِعَمَلِ أَهْلِ الْجَنَّةِ حَتَّى مَا يَكُونُ بَيْنَهَا وَبَيْنَهُ إِلَّا ذِرَاعٌ فَيَسْبِقُ عَلَيْهِ الْكِتَابُ فَيَعْمَلُ بِعَمْلِ أَهْلِ النَّارِ فَيَدْخُلُهَا. That a person, maybe he does the actions of a person deserving to go to paradise. His life spent on actions that are deserving of paradise for him. But then at the end, the decree overcomes the affair, his situation changes, and he ends up upon some shirk or some affair of that nature, and in the end, he actually then ends up in the hellfire, even though there was nothing between him and paradise other than a handspan. He was practically, virtually there. But then something occurred, his heart changed, and he fell into that which led to him going to the hellfire instead. So the messenger said, "What is it that's going to give me security? Why should I feel secure?" And the hearts are between the fingers of Ar-Rahman, and he changes them as he pleases. فَعَلَى الْإِنسَانِ أَنْ يَسْأَلَ اللَّهِ أَنْ يَهْدِيَ قَلْبَهُ. So it is upon a person to ask Allah that Allah guides his heart. وَعَلَيْهِ أَيْضًا أَنْ يَتَجَنَّبَ مَا يُفْسِدُ الْقَلْبِ. And to stay away from the affairs that corrupt your heart. To stay away from the matters that corrupt the heart of an individual. And that is all types of matters, from the shubuhat and the ma'asi, from the doubts and the ambiguous affairs, and from the sinning, the various matters that bring about corruption upon the heart of a person, from different types of sins, whether those sins are public or private, whether those sins are upon your limbs or upon your tongue, sins that the people they fall into, evil speech and corruption the people they fall into. To avoid those affairs and keep yourself free of those affairs, keep yourself free of those who behave in manners that oppose the Quran and the Sunnah. They behave upon sinning and transgression. As the Messenger said, إِنَّ الْمَرْءَ عَلَى دِينِ خَلِيلِهِ فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَحَدُكُمْ مَنْ يُخَالِلْ. That a person is upon the religion of his colleague, of his friend. So look carefully to who your colleagues and your friends are. You will be upon the same religion as them. If they are people who are constantly backbiting, then you will eventually slowly start doing that without realizing. If they are people who are constantly falling into namimah, carrying tales between the people, and he said and she said and this happened and that happened and he said this, he said that, and that is their life and that is all they ever talk about, then eventually you will fall into that. If they are people who constantly lie, then eventually you will fall into that. But if you are accompanying people who are righteous, upright, they fear Allah, they control their tongue, and they do not speak with corruption or namima or backbiting or lying, and they do not behave with cheating and deception and fraud and they do not do the affairs that are impermissible, but they are upon righteousness, then that impacts upon you, and you will inshallah ta'ala also then be upon that goodness and righteousness. So the Shaykh says, stay away from things that will cause corruption to your heart. Stay away from things that will cause corruption to your heart. And so looking at the haram, listening to the haram, النظر إلى الحرام واستماع الحرام, looking at that which is impermissible for you, or listening to those things that are impermissible for you. And these days, this is something which is even more widespread because of all of the social media and technology. On your phone, wherever you are, it is all there, the access is all there to all of the haram, the music and whatever it might be, and all of the different channels and medias and all of the platforms that exist. Everything is there and available to you. So it's even more important for a person to remember this, to keep himself free of those platforms and those sites and whatever it might be, to keep himself free of those social media circles and those types of affairs where corruption is occurring and evil speech is occurring, to rid yourself of that. It is the simplest way to rid yourself of that. Exit yourself from those affairs, free yourself from those affairs, and then you will find a contentment and peace in your heart that you would not otherwise if you were still involved in all types of speech and all types of places and platforms where you hear this and hear that and all types of affairs are occurring that have no benefit to your talab al-ilm. They do not benefit your seeking of knowledge, rather they harm your seeking of knowledge. Then that is from the corruption that occurs to your heart. So a person must be careful, especially with the technology these days, to free himself of the affairs that would cause corruption to your heart. So the Shaykh says, by avoiding all of that and taking the means to goodness, then inshallah ta'ala you will acquire a righteous and upright heart, and that will then bring all of your affairs into righteousness and uprightness. That brings us to the end of hadith number 6. And next time we'll start next week inshallah with hadith number 7, which is the hadith regarding ad-deenun nasiha, nasiha lillah wa li kitabihi wa li rasulihi wa li a'immatil muslimina wa ammatihim. It's a short hadith, but there's a lot within it. Within the rights of Allah, the rights of the Quran, the rights of the Messenger, the rights of the rulers, the rights of other Muslims. A lot of the rights are going to be discussed in that narration. So we'll begin with that next week inshallah ta'ala at 6:15 p.m. Any questions then before we conclude today?